Forms are a critical part of being able to communicate on the web. But not only do we want to send text, we might want to send files, such as maybe we want to send an image, whether that's a screenshot or just some kind of image we want to upload to a form. But sending files as part of a form isn't as simple as adding a text input. We need to consider how we actually recognize the file and be able to get that file to send it through with our request. So we're going to see how we can actually grab that file from the picker and how we can even send it through an API request. We'll even see how we can simplify it with a library called React Dropzone. So let's start off the basics where we actually need a file input to begin with. Inside my code, I already have some of the other components abstracted, but really they're just wrapper around Tailwind styles. So in this form row, I'm just going to work with the default input rather than try to componentize at this point. So I'm going to add input where I'm going to say type is equal to file, and I'm going to say the name of it is equal to image, as I ultimately want to upload an image. And that gives me my input, and I can go ahead and choose a file, but that's not really going to give me anything. I can't actually do anything with it at this point. So next, let's actually try to grab that file so we can then ultimately do something. Now, one of the more common ways of being able to grab a specific value from a form is to be able to reference the name from that event target, where, for instance, if I want to grab the name field, and if I scroll down and I can see where I'm actually having the name field as a name of name, I can actually grab that by running console.log, where I'm going to just console out my name of e.target, where I'm going to grab the name, which is the name of the field, and I'm going to console log out the value. So now if I actually try to submit this form, we can see that I get that name of Colby, as I was able to easily reference that. Now we'll come back to the types in a second. This is valid. It just doesn't know ahead of time that it has a field of name, but we can't do the same thing with our image field. If I try to log that out, it's going to give me this path, which is, as you can see, a fake path for security reasons. So what we need to do is actually listen to the change of this input, and anytime it changes or somebody selects a field, we're going to grab that file from that change event. So I'm going to add a new property of onChange, and I'm going to set that equal to handle onChange. And I'm going to define that new function of handle onChange, where this is going to give me an event as well. And I'm going to paste in the TypeScript syntax for this, but it's going to give me a form event for an HTML input element. Now for trying to figure out some of this TypeScript stuff, I like to reference this handy React TypeScript cheat sheet, where under the form and events page, they give an example of how we can actually start to type out some of these fields so that we don't get warnings. But it's going to work a little bit differently for us here. So I'm going to define a constant of target, where I'm going to set that equal to e.target as, where it's going to be our HTML input element. I'm going to specify and, where we're going to define our files, because it's going to give us a list of files, and it's going to be a file list type. As I said, it's going to give us a list of files, not just one file, where we're going to just work with one file to begin with, but we can technically set this up to work with multiple files. But now, just to see if this is working, let's console log out our target.files, where now if I go ahead and choose that file, we can see our file list listed out, or where we have that first file of robot. So now let's go ahead and save that file, where I'm going to create a new set of states where I'm going to call this file. I'm going to make sure I update this to lowercase, but what this is going to be is we're going to have either a file or undefined, mostly because I'm going to make the default value undefined. But what we can do now is we can say we're going to set file, and we're going to take our target files, and we're going to grab the first file inside. So our ultimate goal, though, was be able to grab this file from inside of the submit handler. So now let's check that out. So I'm going to console log out our file. Once I have my file selected, I can now click submit, and we can see that we now have that file available. So at this point, we now have that file available in our form handler, and we can actually use it now to send it somewhere. As an easy way for me to get this somewhere, I'm going to use the Cloudinary API, where I can use the REST API, and I can pass in an unauthenticated request using an upload preset. Now, this isn't going to be a secure method. Ideally, I would have some kind of serverless function in front of it, but this is just a good example of how I can pass this right into an API. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a new constant called form data, which is going to be a new instance of form data, where the way that form data works is once you have that original form data source, you're going to append the different fields to it. And I want to append my file. So I'm going to go ahead and just pass in where I have the name of the file as file, or the field rather. And then I'm going to pass in that file that I set earlier from above. Now, part of the issue here is file could technically not actually be defined. It could be undefined. So what we want to do ahead of time is just to satisfy TypeScript at this point, where, ideally we would have some kind of validation on this, but what I can say is if type of file equals undefined, let's just bail out. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to upload to Cloudinary. Part of that is having an upload preset, where I've gone ahead and set up an upload preset for myself and marking it as unsigned. So I'll paste that in as the field value, but then I need my API key, which I can grab from my programmable media dashboard where I can just simply copy it, where generally I recommend using environment variables instead of pasting stuff right in. So we're going to use import.meta.env, where I'm going to make my Vite Cloudinary API key. And with that, you'll also want to make sure that you actually have that API key configured inside of your environment. But now all we need to do is actually send a post request to the upload endpoint. So let's add constant results equals await fetch. We're going to pass in that endpoint. And I'm going to also update the cloud name where this demo, I need to swap it out to Colby Cloud Examples, which is my cloud name. And then we're going to add a second parameter. We're going to specify a method of, if I can spell, post, but then we want to also specify the body, which is going to be that form data. Now, just like any other fetch request, we want to also make sure that we transform that to JSON so that we have that in a workable format. But then I'm going to console log out those results, where now with my image selected, I can click submit. We can see that it's going to take a second to actually upload it, but now I have my results completely available. I even get my URL here. Look at my secure URL where I can open up the image. Oops, I had the quotes on there, and I have my robot. Now there's a few ways that we can customize this and take this further. The way that I have this set up is technically we can really upload any kind of file, such as this .pages file, where that's not going to be an image, so that's not going to load how we want. So on my input, I can specify accept, where I'm going to pass in image, ping, image, JPEG, and really whatever formats that I want. If we try to go back inside of the picker, we can see that I can no longer select those files, but if I go back to my robot, he's all safe and sound. Now, as I mentioned, we were only doing a single file for this, but if we wanted to do multiple, we can specify a property of multiple. And now inside, I can go to a folder and I can select multiple files. But again, our current setup is not meant to handle that. So how about actually displaying a preview of this? What if when I select my robot, I want to actually display it on the page before I submit it? When we actually grab that file, we can also read the file using browser APIs in order to actually get the information from that file. So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to set up a new set of states called preview. To also make this lowercase p. I'm going to also make this is undefined, and I think this is going to be a string. Of course, that's not going to be wrapped in a string, but I'm going to create a new constant called file, and I'm going to set that equal to a new file reader, where we're going to use the file reader to actually load that image file, where we're going to say file.onload. We're going to run a function, which is going to actually occur after we read that file result. But then we're going to say file.read as data URL, which is going to allow us to read that file. So we're going to pass in our target.file. And once this loads, we're going to be able to grab a different value from this file. So I'm going to console log out file.result so we can see what that looks like. So whenever I actually choose that image, we can see in the console, that looks like it is a data URL, which is exactly what we can pass into an image. So let's actually store our set preview for that file result value, where it looks like this is not happy. And what it's actually giving us is an array buffer. So I'm going to replace that string with array buffer. And let's see if that made it happy. Looks like it could also be null. So what we'll do is we'll actually just default that value as null to make that a little bit simpler. Where funny enough, we actually need that string as well for this because it could be a string. So we're going to go back up, make that either a string, array buffer, or null. But what we have done now is actually satisfy that result. And now we're going to have that preview inside of our preview variable. So now that we have that available, let's go all the way back down to where we're actually grabbing that file input. And this isn't going to look pretty to start, but now we can actually pass that in as our source. And this time when we actually go to select that image, we can see it pop up right inside of the page. And then once we actually click submit, we're also going to see that result pop up with the actual image that we can then send along through that form. But okay, doing a lot of this was manual. How can we make this a little bit easier on ourselves and actually use a library such as drag and drop? So that's where tools like React Dropzone come in, where we can actually start to install this dependency. So I'm going to copy npm install React Dropzone. I'm going to paste that in where I'm going to install the dependency. Where we can see the basic usage here. We're not going to do the exact same thing, but we can start to copy some things in. Like we want to need this import of use dropzone. So I'm going to paste that right at the top. Now we don't necessarily need to use this on drop, but what this is going to allow us to do is take the file similar to how we were reading it, and we're going to be able to read that file still and provide that preview. So let's just copy this all as is. I'm going to paste it right at the top. But we also need to make sure we import that use callback from React. Now, if we look at the actual DOM that's getting rendered, we can copy this div, which they provide a lot of these options for us for actually giving the props, so we don't have to set that up all of ourselves. And I'm going to go ahead and replace the file picker here. Now, by default, this gives us a pretty unstyled look at something, and you can use Tailwind or whatever you want to style that up. I'm not going to handle that now, but we can see that if we click this, we get the file picker. But also, if I just simply drag my file into it, we get a drag and drop area where we can now drag that robot image inside. Now, that basic usage doesn't come with a lot of options, but we can see that back up top, we got that on drop function that we can start to tap into. So we get the files passed in through this accepted files. So instead of running all this information on change, what we can do is we can grab this similar file reader information and we can paste it inside this on drop function and pass in where we're going to just grab that first accepted file. Now, to make Typescript happy, we can also type out this accepted files, which is similarly going to be a file list. But now when I drag in my handy robot, we can see that we get that preview again. Now, this does come with some other convenience methods where inside of this use Dropzone hook, I can also grab the accepted files as they're uploaded. That way I can probably just completely get rid of this handle on change, as I no longer need that anymore since we'll have those files available. So for instance, if I got rid of that handle on change and actually look for where we're grabbing those files, if we remember, we're setting that singular file where we're setting that into state, so we can get rid of that too. And instead of grabbing that file alone, we can now just replace file with accepted files 0. I can do that with the actual appending of the form data, where now I can drag in my robot and I can click submit and I get my result. Where now I can take that result along with all the other fields inside of my form and pass that along to whatever submission that I want. Dealing with files inside of forms can become a little bit tricky, but luckily there's a lot of tools for us to help to work with it and give us some flexibility. If you want to learn more about how you can pull together all the pieces for a full stack React app, I'm creating a course where you can learn how to do just that. So head over to spacejelly.dev/react-appright, where you can sign up to get updates as well as tips for working with React. If you're setting up a form, chances are you want to have a dedicated page for that form, like a contact form. So how about set up some simple routing for that contact page using tools like Wouter, which will easily help you set up routing. Stop what you're doing, like this video, hit subscribe, and click that little notification bell for future web dev tutorials. Thanks for watching.